get down to Holbrook, you won't find me there. Good Lord, I got the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. Caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. 'Cause I caught my steel pony and boys, I'm gonna ride. Getting far too old to follow this year herd. Good Lord, I got the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. Caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. Till I caught my steel pony and boys, I'm gonna ride. Here I go.
Welcome to the EXCELcast. This is Mark Clegg. I'm Director of Entrepreneurship and Career Services here at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And you've already met Dom Flemons, so founder of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, but also now the American Songster, right? Out on your own as a solo act. And tell us about that song and your new project.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Well, that song there, Steel Pony Blues, comes from my most recent project, which is one called Black Cowboys, Songs from the Trails to the Rails.
And were there a lot of black cowboys? People probably aren't too familiar with that.
Well, you know, I came across a book called The Negro Cowboys, and just a wonderful history. And, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but it's about 50% of the cowboys that settled the West were African-American cowboys.
Wow.
And that was along with the Mexican vaqueros, who were the previous cowboys who preceded everybody else in the United States. And then, of course, the white cowboys were out there. Mm-hmm. There were Indian cowboys as well. And that was something that it really blew me away, because I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona, so I'm from in the Southwest, and I hadn't really heard much about black cowboys as like a concept or a thing. And of course, when you see movies with cowboys in them, you don't necessarily see
not a lot of diversity on there.
No, not at all. And so it's one of those things where the actual settling of the West, if you think of it as connected with the end of the Civil War and the beginning of Reconstruction, as people moved away from the South to build new, sometimes it was new plantations, sometimes it was just new settlements, they brought all the people that were living in the East Coast out west. So this was kind of the first time people really ventured out as new citizens of the United States, and especially the African-American cowboys. They all, they had been in slavery, and they'd been working with cattle, they'd been working with horses, and they were very good at it because that was their, the job that they had to do. And so they took that out into the West, and they became their own sort of entrepreneurs. And so since the title is called, it's called Songs from the Trails to the Rails, because the other thing that connected the black cowboys was that many of them became Pullman porters, mm-hmm. who were assistants on the railroad trains. So first you had the settlement of the West through trails and through the cattle drives, mm-hmm. and then you had the railroads coming, and then you had these cowboys start working on the railroads. And so
the steel pony is a locomotive?
That's right. And I mentioned a town called Holbrook, which is in northern Arizona. It's there's a song, Get Your Kicks on Route 66, and in the bridge it says, Flagstaff, Arizona, which is northern mm-hmm. Arizona, and don't forget Winona, which is also in Arizona. But Flagstaff's between Holbrook's between Flagstaff and Winona, so it's a real small town. But my grandfather started his church there, Church of God in Christ, in the early 1950s, and so I'd known about this town, Holbrook. But as it turned out, when I looked up the history of it, Holbrook was the first place that people could transport cattle by train in Arizona. And so this town, which has always been a very, very out-of-the-way place, actually has this very deep history with the settlement of the West. And one of the black cowboys I studied up on, a fellow by the name of Nat Love, that was his main ranch was out in Holbrook, Arizona. And so I wrote Steel Pony Blues to be kind of a tribute to Nat Love, and then also kind of be a tribute to my grandfather. And then when I brought it up to my own dad, he told me when he was growing up in Flagstaff, you had 2 jobs in the summer you could do, which was either work at the sawmill or become a Pullman porter. So even in the early 60s when my dad was growing up, you could still become a Pullman porter, and that was part of the normal jobs for black people at that time. Of course, the Pullman porters went all the way from coast to coast, delivering the news from every black metropolis and black city center like Chicago, or they'd get it from places like Ogden, Utah, and Portland, all those places. They all connected together, and that was how people kept up, was through the Pullman porters.
Right. It's an important voice in the civil rights movement to be able to have these men carrying news and sort of firsthand experiences from north to south and back.
Well, that's right. Even Martin Luther King Jr., he went to the Pullman porters first to get the idea for the bus boycotts, because the Pullman porters were in a very interesting position where they were all called George, and that was just kind of a racial epitaph. It was like, hey, George, and didn't matter what your name was.
Like as if they were owned by George Pullman.
That's right, that's right. And so they had this sort of what would be considered a slightly demeaning role, but at the same time they were given a lot of power because they were talking to these elite people and these more well-established people in the train cars. So they had a perspective that they conveyed on to Martin Luther King Jr. to help him start thinking about how could he do a boycott that would really shake things up. And so it connects all the way back to this story of the black cowboys.
That's fantastic. So you just gave us an example of what I was hoping to talk to you about today, which is musical storytelling, the way in which you shape an experience for your audience and sort of invite them in through ideas, emotion, to your musical performances and sort of shape a kind of experience. Can you talk a little bit about, have you always been telling stories with your music, or is that something you've developed? Is it hard to sort of switch back and forth between playing and talking, or did it just take practice?
Well, the funny thing is that it's always been a very natural thing for me. I didn't start out doing it necessarily. I started playing when I was about 16. I was just learning songs, and I thought that was great in of itself. Like anybody else learning an instrument, you just want to learn everything you can on it. But it wasn't until I was about 18 I saw the great folk singer Dave Van Ronk, and I loved the way that he told stories between his songs. In the course of a 90-minute performance, he did about 12 songs, but he told these excellent stories about people like Bob Dylan, Mississippi John Hurt, Reverend Gary Davis, and all these people that, as a young kid myself, I never would have gotten a chance to ever meet these guys. But to be able to get the first-hand information from a guy who knew them, that was just so exciting. He also told interesting historical anecdotes, and then he also told his own sort of personal anecdotes about songs or whatever it was. And I thought that was a great format in which to do a show, because songs are great in of themselves, but to hear the story behind it, that's something that makes the audience that's already into it more into the music, because then they understand the emotional connection that comes with the music. And of course I've applied this to the African American folk music traditions that I've worked with in a long time, because when we talk about things like slavery and the misappropriation that came in through the Reconstruction era and things like that, going all the way into the modern era, it's really difficult actually. Socially, there's some very difficult times, but the music really helps open the conversation up so that people can understand it without having to live within it. Because in that way, it's a way for them to be able to truly take the emotional ideas of these eras and bring them forward, because it's a tricky time. Like if you're not a black person who was brought up in slavery, like I wasn't brought up in slavery, and how can I relate to these people that were brought up in this really horrific time? And so the music helped me understand that. And then people that are even outside of that, outside of being African American people, you can understand how people felt about things compared to just reading about this is what happened. You can read how people felt about things, or how they raised their voices in unconventional manners. You know, and of course, obviously, songs are kind of like social media before social media existed in a certain way. Just because, for example, the Titanic, the great big ship that went down, and of course there was a big political message that was being conveyed, because they touted it as the greatest ship that ever sailed on the seas. It was the biggest ship, and it was going to have everything. And then the fact that this thing hit an iceberg and sunk was something that resonated with people so much that there are hundreds of songs about the Titanic, but they talk about different things. Some of them are just about the Titanic sinking. Other ones are about the emotional distress that the people in the Titanic felt. And other ones, they even have the band playing the song "Nearer My God to Thee" as the Titanic's going down. And each version of that gives you a different emotion about what people were thinking, and also what the audiences that were listening to the songs either were wanting to hear, or whatever the songwriter wanted to convey to that audience, so that when they walked away they said, "Oh yeah, well that's what happens when you try to be too big for your britches," or you know, if you're poor and you're on this Titanic, that tells you what the rich people are going to do to you. Whatever version of the story you want to tell about it. But that's the beauty of folk songs.
Yeah, it forges this human connection.
Absolutely.
From the past to the present, or from other types of people having different experiences than you. So we have a lot of musicians here at the School of Music, Theater and Dance. We have, they give recitals to graduate. They have to do that. And the traditional way is they come out and they bow, and there's clapping, and they sit down and they play very seriously, and then they get up and bow, and there's clapping, and they walk off and they walk back on, but they don't say anything. So what tips would you have to offer them about, what could they say, or how might they approach talking to an audience in ways that might deepen their relationship to their fans, or build that kind of relationship that could then lead to buying a record, or just following them, coming to another concert? What kind of tips have you learned?
Well, I mean, it's really trying to understand who your audience is and what they want from you as a performer. That's something that you can do personally. Just even going out into the audience after the show and asking why people liked the performance. And that it seems kind of silly as a performer to go out down to the people and ask them what they like about your performance, but they'll tell you. A lot of people like that I tell stories. They like that I'm a tradition bearer, playing this old music that might have died without. And then also they like the fact that I look like I'm having a good time on stage. I know that's a little bit different from classical music. My act is all about breaking the fourth wall. I come out there, and the first thing I do is I introduce myself and I talk to the audience directly, because just like when I saw Dave Van Ronk, the fact that he broke that fourth wall and told people stories about himself, small nuggets of information that each individual can take away, that was something that just was really, really exciting for me. And not everybody's wanting to hear all that history necessarily, but as a performer, find what the interesting kernel of information is on your song, and then use that as your conduit to get to the next song even. So like, if I did Steel Pony Blues, I'd probably tell you a little bit about the Black Cowboys, and I'd tell you about my grandfather with the church. That tells you a little bit about me. It tells you a little about the broad history behind the song, and then also it's an original number. So it gives you 3 levels of information without me having to beat you over the head with saying, oh, this is very important all the time. And I think that can be done too, because with the classical music, there's so many amazing pieces of music that people play that the audience might not know anything. They might not know anything about the composer, or they might not know anything about the context of in which the music was written. Because, I imagine at a school where they're teaching all different types of classical music, just even say, this is from the Romantic period, or the Baroque period, or the Classical period, or something like that. One of my favorite composers is what was his name? Armand Benda, who was a guy that was halfway between the Baroque era and I think it was the the classical era. Yeah, because the Romantic era came after it.
Exactly.
And so I just love the fact that his music reflects that when you hear it. And I remember I was taking a music appreciation class, and they played a little clip of this one symphony. I can't remember what it is now, and I thought it was so great, but I didn't understand why. But then they told me it was the halfway point, and I actually wrote a paper on it describing how it was like the first time I heard Louis Armstrong doing the Hot 5 recordings after having heard the King Oliver recordings, where you have a young Louis Armstrong doing his music. And so that's the sort of stuff I'll free associate music like that. But
those transition periods are
a
place of creativity.
Exactly. And so as a performer, you have a lot of power to do that. You can go out there and give all sorts of information to your audience. But of course it has to be condensed so that, like I said, you have to focus on the kernel of knowledge you want to give to your audience. Because if you go on too long of a story, people want to hear the music first. But people love to be able to associate one thing with another thing. Because music is a beautiful thing, but if you got that emotional story, that human story, it makes it just that much better.
Absolutely. So you did a concert Monday night at the Arc, 90-minute set, no intermission.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how do you shape or choreograph the whole experience to sort of carry. I mean, I was in the audience, and I just never felt a break. There was never a moment where I was disengaged. You had me the whole time. So did that just happen, or is that something that you sort of plan out and kind of almost like cinemagraphically before you start?
Oh, yeah. Well, I always make sure to have a skeleton for my set list, you know. With a 90-minute set, I can usually fit about 18 numbers into a set, and that's assuming that each piece is going to take 5 minutes, and that's including story and music. So some songs I do are very short, like I usually start out with one of the more unique arrangements I play, an old-time song called Old Cindy Gal, and it's a song I learned from a black fiddler by the name of Joe Thompson, and he was the bassist for the Carolina Chocolate Drops. So to start out the show, I always like to reference where I was and where I've been, and so Cindy Gal is a great number, and based on the amount of time I have, I'll do a longer version, or I might do a very short 30-second version. So like if I had 30 minutes to do my thing, I'll just come out there with the bones and the harmonica and do my thing for 30 seconds and then call it quits. In a bigger show, I'll do the whole 2.5 minutes. I'll tell a little bit about that song, and then I'll jump to the next one. And so it's like, I'll start with that unique arrangement, then I'll pull the banjo out first usually, because banjo is always something that people love, you know, and I'll pull out maybe the quills. So I'll do like a number of the quills with the panpipe and the banjo. And then I'll jump into doing some guitar songs. So I'll show off a little bit of finger picking. I might show off a little original music here and there, just because after about 4 or 5 numbers of traditional stuff, I feel like I've established at least that I know how to play this old type of music, and then I can kind of ease in some original material. Then after that, because most of my original songs, not all of them are up-tempo. I usually keep the slower ones just for the emotional impact. So it kind of takes the energy from way up high with the harmonica and the bones, and then it takes it down with the guitar, and then it takes it a little farther down when I get to the seated position. Because see, when you're performing, you have 3 levels of energy you can put out there. So, so for the folks here, I'm sitting here, this is one set of energy. If I stand up, that's a second set of energy. And if I were to start waving my hands around, that's a third set of energy that I could produce for an audience without even playing a song. And so working about 3/4 of the way into the set, I'll do a seated position, and I'll do some of the more old-timey stuff. It's a little easier to play the more intricate stuff when I'm sitting down, and so I'll sit down, play some numbers, and then I'll end out with a fast banjo number, and that'll get everybody hooped up again. So I'll stand up, and then I'll finish it out with a couple more exciting numbers. And by that point, that's about 90 minutes worth right there. And I usually end it out with my song Till the Seas Run Dry, just to end on an original number, and it's probably one of my most up-tempo type numbers with a lot of excitement and really thrilling harmonica on it. And then bow and take off. And I might do one or two encores based on how good the audience is responding to everything like that. But it mostly stays somewhere along those lines. There'll always be like Cindy Gal, Till the Seas Run Dry, and then a standing section, a seated section, and then a final section with standing in it. And it just kind of shows off just the different dimensions that you can go about playing the music. And of course, I'll mix up guitar styles as I go along. I'll mix up banjo styles as I go along. And that's just the skeleton. So
variety and contrast, and then sort of working with this kind of energetic shape to the whole thing,
exactly.
where you sort of start high, end high, this big sort of propulsive loop in the middle.
Absolutely. Because then also I can have 3 or 4 different numbers that are the types of songs. So I don't have to feel like I'm stuck in just one set list every night. I can kind of have the skeleton, and if I'm not feeling a song one night, then I'll bring in a different number. Or I'll, instead of, if like my harmonicas break, which sometimes the harmonicas will break, the reeds will go bad or something like that, I can substitute it with a different type of number, like a song where I'm yodeling, for example, you know.
So maybe last topic. Let's just talk about your look. You know, you've sort of created a very distinctive brand for yourself, a sort of identity that's, you know, we know it's Dom Flemons when we see even just your shadow would identify who you are. So is this something that, you know, you were always looked like this when you were? If we met the 11-year-old Dom Flemons, would you be wearing a plaid shirt and a hat, or is this something that sort of came up as part of a folk music persona? How much of this is like designed, and how much of this is sort of happened?
Well, I'd say that it was probably about 50-50 when it came to design compared to personal taste, because it's definitely my own personal taste that's brought my style around. Yeah, it's very authentic.
You feel good.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This way.
I'd say about when I was maybe, I don't know, 17 or 18, I started getting into wearing plaid shirts because I really liked how there was such a variety of colors. And I was also really into silent movies when I first started performing out. So the idea of having something that looked exactly the same but having small variations, you know, like when I'm thinking about people like Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd, those particular type of players, they had a distinctive image. Like Charlie Chaplin, the Little Tramp, you can point out his little derby, his little mustache, cane, the whole thing, without thinking too hard about. You don't even have to know it's Charlie Chaplin. You just know, oh, that's that character, you know. And I just really enjoyed that idea. So when it came to the plaid shirts, I was already wearing them. And so then I just started getting into different colors of them, because also, you know, it's very functional. Even groups like the Kingston Trio in the 60s, they had this look of striped shirts that they wore. And they had the same thing that I did. You could go to any dress store and you can find plaid shirts anywhere. So, you know, it's also functional in terms of if I like spilled coffee all over this, I could go down to a Dillard's or a Macy's or something, and I could find a new shirt to replace it. And so it started with that. The suspenders came in once I went to North Carolina. These are newer ones that I've just added that have the nice little buffalo, the little buffalo nickels. I decided to finally step them up a little bit. I never wanted to be a fancy suit guy, so I always had like these my clip-on suspenders going on, just so it would seem just a little bit DIY, you know. Corduroy pants. I came to love wearing corduroy pants because it's, you know, if I'm not wearing this, I'm really a jeans and t-shirt guy. And I didn't want to be that acoustic guy that's played in jeans and t-shirt, because there were so many people, especially country blues guys, that were dressed up like that. You know, of course, I like to wear shoes and stuff, Birkenstocks. That's the other thing that a lot of country blues guys will have. But
well, how about the hat?
On the hat, and the hat, I was wearing a pork pie for a long time, and I got this one from Australia. This is actually an Akubra. This is the Australian version of the Stetson hat. And so I love the fact that it looked like a pork pie hat with a slightly bigger
It's
brim.
got a little Ellington in it for me.
Yeah, yeah. You know, so that was the idea, was to work with the pork pie idea, because, see, with Buster Keaton, see, one of the keys to his style was he had a little flat hat with a little top on it. And he was a short guy, though. So a little hat with a short guy works better than a little hat on a big guy. And so it just happened to work out when I first saw this hat, because of course, you know, usually they pin up one side like this, and it's like, good day, mate, you know, for the rancher look. And I just love the fact that the brim was just so nice looking on it, and it was bigger, so it didn't look quite so look quite so strange on a tall guy. And so that was how I started out with it. And you know, it's a unique hat. I think it's a beaver fur pelt on here.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So do you think, like, what's my look going to be this year? How often does this change? Is this a pretty stable look for you, or?
The main stuff always pretty much stays the same at this point in time. I've thought about it every once in a while because I do see a lot more people wearing plaid shirts, and then also the big glasses too. I decided to have really big glasses instead of normal size glasses. I picked really big glasses to go with it, and so I see a lot more people with big glasses and plaid shirts, so I may have to figure out something, you know. But
this very much fits your artistic identity too, because you're interested in old-time music. You've been very stable, and this is your mission.
Absolutely.
And you're carrying that mission out. So I mean, sort of top to bottom, inside and out, you are living that purpose. And
absolutely.
Is this something? How did you discover your love of this music?
Well, it started with the love of literature. You know, I've always been interested in books and history and stories, and folk music just was a great way to have all of those things combined. And then when I studied in college, I studied Chaucer and Shakespeare and Mark Twain and a lot of the great early American poets, Robert Frost and Edward Arlington Robinson and people like that. And I just took to that, and I really liked the idea of complex poetry. So that got me into like Bob Dylan, and that got me into the beat poets. So then I had a whole time I was into Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs and people like that, Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And so I had a whole period where I was into a lot of poetry. And while I was doing that, I was listening to what the beat poets were listening to, which was Charles Mingus and Cannonball Adderley and Art Blakey. So even though I never played bebop jazz, I had a great appreciation for it aesthetically, so I could listen to it and then I could write to it. And so all that stuff kind of, when you lay it out on a timeline, all these different styles of music all overlap with each other. So it's not that crazy once you start looking at all of it in the historical context that you can see it's all interrelated. And so I just took that with me and applied it to all of the music I was into. So I did slam poetry for a while. I had about 5 years I was doing slam poetry, really just full on. I gave up music for a while and just wanted to do poetry. And so I went to 2 different national poetry slams and went to 1 college national slam as well. So I got to do pretty well on that. And then I fell back in love with music, so I just went back to music. And it was around then that I went to the Black Banjo Gathering in Boone, North Carolina in 2005. And that was where I met Rhiannon Giddens and Justin Robinson, who I'd formed the Carolina Chocolate Drops with. So it was all really one step at a time. I just pieced together the building blocks of my repertoire. And then as I went along, I found that there was a lot of documentation and a lot of history work and a lot of musical archaeology work that could be done with black string band and black folk music. Because at that time it was like LeadBelly was the main person who was a musician who not only represented blues and spirituals and early jazz, but he also represented folk music like John Henry and all this old black folk music that up to that time most of the practitioners were white musicians. And so when I got into LeadBelly, that took me down a rabbit hole. And then as I went to the Black Banjo Gathering, I connected with Joe Thompson, who I mentioned earlier, and his type of string band music. In my mind, it connected LeadBelly's type of string band music that he was doing way over here into one thing, and I realized they were a shared tradition. And then I also saw there wasn't a lot of information written about the connection of these 2 different types of music. So I made it my mission to go ahead and connect those 2 things together.
Well, I'm so glad you did, and thank you so much for just joining us today, and thanks for all you do to keep this tradition alive, and I think bring it to life for all of us. It's so important to have this be a living tradition.
Absolutely.
Not just a tradition out there. So I love your original stuff as well as your all-time stuff. So
Oh,
thanks so much for visiting us today, Don.
Appreciate it. Thank you.